This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. Today, I want to talk about certainty and uncertainty. Each one side of the coin, right? I don't know about you, but when it comes to tomorrow, I'm majorly uncertain. I don't know what's going to happen. I have no clue. I can think of, though, the worst case scenarios, a very stoic tradition. I can think of the worst case scenarios. I could go all Marcus Aurelius. But a lot of people today, they kind of figure the crisis of '08, that's a few years back. Fed's got everything figured out. Things are certain. Things are certain. Stock market's at all-time highs, right? Stock market's at all-time highs. There's nothing to be worried about. Daddy government's got it all figured out. Certainty versus uncertainty. I want to read a few quotes to start this podcast off. First, this is from Gilda Radner, who was originally on Saturday Night Live. I believe she was one of the original cast members. Great quote. Quote, "I wanted a perfect ending. Now I've learned the hard way that some poems don't rhyme and some stories don't have a clear beginning, middle, and end. Life is about not knowing, having to change, taking the moment and making the best of it without knowing what's going to happen next. Delicious ambiguity." End quote. Great, right? Love it. So Richard Feynman, physicist, very famous. I'll read his little passage here on the same idea, certainty, uncertainty. Quote, "I think it's much more interesting to live not knowing than to have answers which might be wrong. I have approximate answers and possible beliefs and different degrees of uncertainty about different things, but I'm not absolutely sure of anything. And there are many things I don't know anything about, such as whether it means anything to ask why we're here. I don't have to know an answer. I don't feel frightened not knowing things by being lost in a mysterious universe without any purpose, which is the way it really is as far as I can tell." End quote. I love that, right? Now, why don't investors think like that? The typical investor doesn't think like that. I think I saw today, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, 59% of U.S. investors believe the market can be predicted. Really? Wow, that's frightening. That's not good. That's not good. That's a lot of people. I can spend the rest of my life trying to educate, and I don't think I'm going to come close to denting that universe. If 59%, I didn't say the whole population, I said investors, but let's say 200 million investors. Maybe that's probably an exaggeration too, whatever. But let's just say 100 million people plus think they can predict the markets. Woo! That's some frightening stuff. And look, I realize it's difficult to take my message, which is this trend following message, this quantitative message, this using science to look at numbers moving on the screen and make decisions about the movements of the numbers without having any fundamental insight about the movements of those numbers. Corn moves up and down. Palladium moves up and down. Apple stock moves up and down. And I'm saying I can literally trade those ups and downs without knowing anything about the market. This is true. This is 100% true. It is such a foreign concept to so many investors. Hey, sure, if you've read my books and you get it, you're probably listening, "Oh, I don't want to hear Mike talk about this anymore." But you know what? Most people don't get this. So if I'm educating you for the first time, that's great. If you are already a trend following trader, then you're probably saying this is great too, because people just don't get it. And it's a nice reminder that they don't get it. So I was thinking about fundamentals the other day, and Ray Dalio, who runs the largest hedge fund in the world, I believe it's north of 125 billion. And by the way, if anybody out there knows who the clients are for Bridgewater, I want to know. And if anybody has the month-by-month performance for Bridgewater, I'd like to see that. So anyways, Ray Dalio at Bridgewater trades systematically, no human discretion, using only fundamentals. Somebody please code that up for me and let me see what that looks like. There's a lot of smart people in this world. So if you can code a 100% systematic strategy using only fundamentals, Ray Dalio is not the only person that can do that if that's what he's doing. So anyways, if anyone knows some client lists, public information, of course, and performance data month by month, I'd love to see it. But as I talk about that, as I bring up the idea of fundamentals, and when I say fundamentals, think like an economist, right? Consumer confidence, crop reports, OPEC ministers did something. And you assemble all these pieces of information. And hearing about Ray Dalio's strategy made me think, well, how many pieces of fundamental information does he need to code into his systematic system so his system can make a decision, which means, I guess, consumer confidence comes into his system. It's designated with a value, meaning the confidence number comes in, and then it's weighted in some formula. And then ultimately, all these weightings give rise to a buy and sell signal and some risk management. I'm assuming. But let's just cut to the heart of the matter, which is a question that I posted the other day. And it's really, really about fundamentals. So this is for you fundamental traders out there. And if you come back to me and you say, oh, what about Warren Buffett? Well, guess what? I'm going to say to you, let's talk about bailouts. Let's talk about derivatives trading, and let's talk about hotlines to the president. Because if Warren Buffett was strictly a fundamental trader, a value guy, maybe that conversation could be had, but he's not. And if he's the only guy you're going to put out there, come on. And by the way, that's not hating on Warren Buffett. I am extremely fond of anybody that can build a success like he has. I just don't, I've said this before, I don't like the disingenuous nature of how he's positioned his trading and investing. So anyways, here's the questions that I posted. If you trade the markets fundamentally, how do you know that you have all of the fundamentals to make a decision? How do you know? And that seems like a tough thing, right? All of the fundamentals. All of the fundamentals. It's a lot of information. And so since having all of those fundamentals seems a terribly difficult goal, how do you account for the remaining uncertainty? If you don't know that you've got all the fundamentals, and I don't think anybody can really say they know they've got all of the fundamentals, how do you account for the remaining uncertainty? What do you do? And if you don't account for the uncertainty, why is that? Good question, right? So somebody immediately wrote in and they said, simple, closing any losing positions once it triggers a stop loss, which was meant to be there accounting for the uncertainty. Well, that's interesting. Seems fair enough. I said, but if a stop loss takes you out of a position initiated on some fundamental understanding, how do you get back in on the fundamentals after the stop out? The stop out that had nothing to do with the fundamentals. Oh, that's a little tricky, isn't it? If you didn't get out on the fundamentals, how do you get back in on the fundamentals? Now, a friend of mine, Frank Curzio, was somebody who walked into that question and gave an honest answer. He said, well, look, I try to meet with management. If I can go visit the companies, that's going to help me. And he didn't try to say that he could eliminate all uncertainty. But when he said about visiting companies, I thought to myself, well, how does one know if they go visit Apple Computer, for example, when it's trading at 700, that it's going to go to 450? How do you know? How can you see into that crystal ball? That seems terribly difficult. And then, of course, the classic example of going to visit a company and really getting the wool pulled over one's eyes is the classic Enron. They had a fake trading floor. They literally created an actor scenario where people sat at computers doing nothing, and it was all fake. Okay, let me get back to making decisions. So how do people make decisions, right? We're talking about using all this fundamental information to make decisions. There are some people out there, this guy Gerd, and I'm not going to try and pronounce his last name because I will screw it up, has famously talked about using simple heuristics, rules of thumb to make decisions. And the classic example that he uses, and I'm going to play this in a clip in a second so you can listen to him explain it. Look, you're in the outfield. You're in the outfield. You're a baseball player. The ball's coming up. Now, do you sit there with a calculator and do all of the trajectories? We're talking some high-level math, to try and catch that ball. Or do you put your glove up and let the gaze just kind of follow the ball into the glove? So that's the idea of simple heuristics. Instead of doing all the complicated stuff, do something simple. Well, the classic simple heuristic for trend following trading, right? The price. If you can't know all of these fundamentals, if you can't be sure about these fundamentals, if you can't account for the uncertainty, you can be certain, though, that a certain price is trading at what it says it is right now. Generally, that's about as certain as we can get. So if you can make decisions off price movement and use that as a simple heuristic for your buying and selling decisions ultimately, well, then you might have something that's nice for dealing with market uncertainty. Fairly straightforward, right? Better decisions with simple models. Look, uncertainty happens. You don't know all the outcomes. Surprise happens. Surprise happens. We know another black swan is going to hit. It's going to swoop in and boom. We're going to turn on CNBC and Kramer and Bartiromo are going to be yapping, and hopefully Kramer will have a meltdown, some great TV. I mean, I'll even watch then. That'd be fantastic. I love that kind of stuff. I love just watching chaos. Because if everyone makes these bets, long beta, that everything will go up forever, and everyone's on the same train, right? Everyone's on the same train straight up. At some point in time, we know that train goes off the tracks. Now, does that mean with QE tapering, it's going to go off the tracks? I don't know, but it's going to go off the tracks. Let me get back. So, because I've talked about going off the tracks for a few podcasts here in the last 6 months, so I don't want to sound completely like a doom and gloomer. I think it's a way to think, and it is a very stoic way. And I mentioned that think about the worst case scenarios in your life: family members dying, auto accident, whatever the worst case scenario is. You going broke. Think about the worst case scenarios. Emotionally think about them, live them. Feel them. And if you can do that honestly. If one of those things happens, it's not as bad. You're prepared for it. I'm not saying it's easy, but if you can prepare yourself for the surprise, you have an advantage. Let me play this clip from Gerzenzier. Gosh, I just pronounced that. I screwed that all up. Somebody in Germany is going to completely laugh at me. And you know what? Go ahead. I wish that us Americans were taught more than one language. My college Spanish doesn't cut the mustard. And I have to tell you, learning Vietnamese is terribly difficult as well. So I fully apologize for the American embarrassment of us speaking one language. Maybe if we weren't separated from the rest of the world with an ocean on each side, we'd do a lot better. That's my only thing I'm going to say about my lack of language skills. I do love people with extra language skills, though. I mean, I'm so jealous of people that can speak multiple languages. So let me jump in and play this clip.
How to make good decisions. Now, if you open a book on rational choice, you will likely read the following message. Look before you leap. Analyze before you act. List all alternatives, all the consequences. And estimate the utilities and do the calculation. This is a beautiful mathematical scheme, but it doesn't describe how most people actually make decisions. And not even how those make decisions who write these books, as the following story illustrates. A professor from Columbia University had an offer from a rival university, and he could not make up his mind whether to accept, reject, go, or stay. A colleague took him aside and said, "What's the problem? Just maximize your expected utility. You're always right about doing this." Exasperated, the professor responded, "Come on, this is serious." The method of listing pros and cons and doing the calculation is an old one. Benjamin Franklin once, in a letter to his nephew, recommended exactly that. So listing all pros and cons, and then weighing and adding. And at the end of his letter, he wrote the following. He said, "If you do not learn it, I apprehend you will never get married." Did you choose your partner by a calculation? Now, I asked my friends who teach this method as the only method to rational choice, how they chose their partner, if they had any choice at all. All of them said, no. There was one exception, and he told me that he applied his own theory. So he explained to me that he listed all the alternatives, all the consequences. For instance, will she still talk to me after being married? Will she take care of the kids and let me work in peace? And then he estimated for each of these women the probability that it will actually occur, and multiplied it by the utilities and made the calculation. Then he proposed to the women with the highest expected utility. She accepted. He never told her how he had chosen her. I met him recently. Now they are divorced. So, I will talk today about two ways of making decision. One is the one that it's told at academia. It has many names. It's Benjamin Franklin's bookkeeping method or expected utility theory. And this is a method that works in a world of risk. That is, when the probabilities, the consequences, and the alternatives are known. And here statistical thinking is enough. A key example is lotteries, or if you play the casino. Then you can calculate how much you will lose. In a different world, the world of uncertainty, calculation is not enough. You need smart rules of thumb that are technically called heuristics, and good intuitions, which are also based on smart rules of thumb. And I will talk today about decision-making under uncertainty, and also about the dangers to use systems that work for risk, for known risk, and apply them to the world of uncertainty. So, choices between two jobs or between partners are all in the world of uncertainty. You can't calculate everything, you don't know the consequences, and there will be surprises. I will make 4 points and then illustrate them with 2 examples. First, the best decision under risk is not the best decision under uncertainty. Second, heuristics that you need in order to make good decisions under uncertainty are indispensable for good decision making. They are not, as it's often claimed, a sign of a kind of mental retardation or of just mental laziness. Third, complex problems do not always require complex solutions. And that's again in a world of uncertainty. And finally, more information, more calculation, more time is not always better. Less can be more. So, let's go to the first example. This is sports. So how does an outfielder catch a fly ball? In baseball, in cricket, or maybe in soccer where the goalie has to get it. So how does he or she know where to run? Now there are two theories about that. One is it's a complex problem, you need complex mental processes, and the other one is it's a complex problem under uncertainty and you need to find a simple method for that. So let's look for the first one. Richard Dawkins, in his famous book The Selfish Genes, proposes the complex method. So what does the outfielder do? He or she calculates the trajectory. Have you ever calculated a trajectory? Okay, that's what you do. And this formula doesn't even have wind in it or spin, so it's not enough. But what else could it be? What you see here is the idea to apply a theory that works if you know everything, like under known risks, to the world of uncertainty. And the key idea is then you say, oh, he behaves as if. And Dawkins puts in the as if. The player would calculate that. What's the alternative? How do real players catch a ball? That's my question. And a number of experiments show that real players use a number of simple heuristics. I'll show you one. This one works when the ball is already high up in the air. It's called the gaze heuristic. And it has 3 steps. First, fixate your eye on the ball, start running, and finally, adjust the running speed so that the angle of gaze remains constant. This player here does exactly that. So he runs so that the angle of gaze remains constant. And that brings him there where the ball will land. Do you want to see it again? Here it is. Importantly, the player can ignore to estimate or calculate every variable that's necessary to estimate the trajectory, every one. And it's a heuristic that belongs to a family of heuristic that just look at one good reason. And then you get there. And you find the same heuristics in evolutionary history. So bats and fish, when they hunt a prey or a mate, which is sometimes not so different, they just keep the optical angle constant in 3-dimensional space, and that's enough. No trajectory correlations. This heuristic is used by players unconsciously. If you ever have interviewed a player and ask him how he's doing this so well, what he can do so well, then you get, intuition. And it's intuition, meaning the person knows what to do but doesn't know why. But how does this intuition function? And as you said, see here, it functions by simple rules. The same rule can be used deliberately. Every rule that we studied can used also be deliberately, and that's very different from what you might hear in some camps about decision making who think that heuristics are unconscious and statistical thinking is conscious. Don't believe that. Here's an example. Remember the miracle on the Hudson River. What had happened? A plane hit shortly after takeoff a formation of Canadian geese, and they flew in both engines and silenced both engines. The pilots turned around to see whether they could get back to LaGuardia Airport, or they would have to do something more risky, like the Hudson River. How did they make this decision? Did they do calculations? They didn't have much time. They used the same heuristic, now deliberately, the gaze heuristic. How does it work in this case? Now, you fixate the tower through your windshield, that's what the pilots did, and if the tower is slowly moving upwards, you won't make it. And that's exactly what Jeffrey Skiles, the co-pilot, is saying, in other words. And here is another instance where heuristics can help us to get a safer world. And the decisions are done very fast. Okay, my second illustration is the world of finance. We know now that the theory of finance is part of the problem, or was part of the problem of the financial crisis, not its solution. Why? Because it's a theory about risk, about known risk, and it's applied to the world of uncertainty, and suggests certainties that are illusory. So, calculations of value at risk and other things. I'll give you one example. Assume you want to invest money, and you don't want to put everything in one basket, but you want to diversify. But how? Harry Markowitz from the University of Chicago got his Nobel Prize for finding the solution. So, when Harry Markowitz made his own investments for the time after his retirement, he used his Nobel Prize winning optimization method. So we might think, no, he did not. He relied on a simple heuristic that we call 1 over n. So you divide your assets equally. For instance, if you have just two alternatives, you divide your money 50-50, and so on. Now the interesting question is, how good is this simple heuristic that doesn't need much calculation in the real world of investment as opposed to the theory of investment? And a study by De Miguel et al. Looked at that and gave the complex Nobel Prize winning method 10 years of data to estimate its parameters and then to estimate what's happening the following months, and the window was then shifted until there was no data left. What was the result? According to common measures, 1 over n made more money than the Nobel Prize winning mean variance model. The interesting question is now not just to show that something simpler does something better, but the real question is, can we identify the world where simplicity pays or where the complex calculations pays? And I'll show you here 3 features of this world where 1 over n outperforms mean variance, or at least very likely outperforms mean variance. One feature is predictive uncertainty is large, and that's the case with stocks. The second one is the number of alternatives is large. And you can see this because the complex methods need to estimate more parameters, 1 over n, not, and then generate more errors. And finally, the learning sample is small. It was 10 years. Now one can ask the following question. If I would have 50 alternatives, how many years of data do I need so that mean variance actually gets better than 1 over n? What do you think? 10 years is too little. 11? 12? The best estimate is 500 years. So in the year 2500, we can switch from our intuitions, 1 over n, to doing the calculations, provided that the same stocks are still around in the stock market in the first place. Do our banks understand that? No? I recently got a letter from my internet bank which said, with Nobel Prize winning strategy to success in investment. And then I read, do you know Harry Markowitz? No, you should know him. And then the story was told that he won the Nobel Prize for solving the problem. And the bank has now adopted his method. And there was a warning about people's intuitions. What this bank has not understood is that they sent the letter 500 years too early. So this is my second illustration about the power of simple rules in an uncertain world. And also about the damage that can happen when you rely on methods that work very well and risk, but apply them blindly to the real world. Ask your own bank what they use. That this is not just a one shot is shown by this slide. There are 20 studies, and what you see here, we have an optimization model that's widely used, multiple regression, and we have 3 heuristics. The minimalist is too simple. It just picks something randomly. The other 2 heuristics have a different philosophy. You already know 1 over n, you just throw the weights away and do it equally. And one good reason is a heuristic that goes with the first good reason that he can find. And then it's, I'm not going into details, they are all mathematically studied. And what you see here is something important. When you know already all the data, that's called fitting, then the complex model is the best one. So you're flexible enough and you explain by hindsight. When you have to predict, then something interesting happens. It's a crossover. And every one of the simplifications is more accurate, not just more frugal and faster. So this condition is like hindsight. For instance, I hear often on radio a financial advisor being asked, why did Microsoft go down yesterday? And he has always an answer. This is hindsight. If he would be asked, is Microsoft going up or down tomorrow? That would be prediction. And prediction is hard. So that's an illustration. So let me get the general picture. What we're studying at the Max Planck Institute is how do people and should people make decisions under uncertainty? And the first question is a descriptive one. What's in the adaptive toolbox? And there are many more heuristics that I can tell you today, and lots of social heuristics. So people trust a doctor. And the study of ecological rationality asks the question, in what situation is this a good idea and when not? So, if your doctor knows the medical evidence, has no conflicts of interest, and doesn't do defensive decision making, that means just has a fear that you might turn into a plaintiff, that's a good idea. But that's not the case in most countries. Most doctors we have studied don't know the evidence, they have conflicts of interest, and they do defensive decision making. So, and finally, how to create situations, environments, and also strategies that are intuitive and that help people to make better decisions. So, let me finish. Decision making under uncertainty is different from decision making under risk. And heuristics are not the second best strategies that we often hear. They can do better than even optimization strategies in a world of uncertainty, not in a world of risk. And finally, more information, more time, and more computation is not always better. Less can be more. Thank you for your attention.
That's a great piece. A little long, some great stories. You know, he really lays it out. The idea of simple heuristics. And from a trend following perspective, simple heuristics, it's all about trading the price. Two fun stories to kind of leave you with. Two fun stories. So if you walk around Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City, and I'm not being overly, what's the word here? I don't know. Let me just tell you the story and you can draw your judgments about me, whatever those might be. But anyways, if you walk the streets of Saigon, the numbers of women that are in short skirts, high heels, riding motorbikes in perfect posture, in a very elegant, classy way, it's off the charts. I have to tell you, it is a fantastic feature of Vietnam that really needs to be exported to the rest of the world. Seriously, this needs to be exported to the rest of the world. Beautiful women on motorbikes, in short skirts, in heels, perfect posture, by the thousands. I think that's a great one. Now, there is something else that's a little interesting that's happened, and I'm sure this could probably happen other places, but it's happened to me twice now. Walking past an embassy, and the guard, I guess, not really paying attention. They all have an Uzi on them, machine gun, and twice now I've kind of felt like the machine gun was pointed at my head, not because they were pointing it at my head, but more because the guard was either changing his arm position or was bored or wasn't paying attention. And you kind of walk by and you almost feel like you have to duck because there's now an Uzi pointed at your head or your body or something. We have to work on that one. I hope I don't have that happen a third time. I'm not really sure what that's related to Simple Heuristics, but maybe someone can develop a heuristic out of that, the machine gun heuristic. In all seriousness, though, this episode was about heuristics, simple heuristics. And I give all the credit to the people that have done the academic research. But even though they've done all the academic research, I think my world is the best representation of heuristics. Trend following is filled with them. And I will talk more and more about those as time goes on. I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.